Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where today we're going to be jumping right back into my build of the On30 San Lorenzo Mini-Layout. Now, if you happen to have missed the first couple of installments, don't worry, you can check them out at the link. But in a nutshell, what I'm doing is taking Verne Niner's San Lorenzo diorama and converting it into a 2x4 foot mini layout. I inherited the diorama from Verne when he passed away several years ago, and I wanted to do this to pay tribute to his wonderful Estrella Sonora Grande On30 layout. So we're going to be picking up pretty much right where we left off last time. I'm going to be building some foam scenery around the edges of the layout, very similar to what I did here on the On18 Banded Canyon Railway. And as usual, we've got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. In the last installment, we got all the track laid and I wired everything up for reliable DCC operations. And now that frees us up to start working on the scenery, which, is my favorite part. Now to fill in this area between the layout deck and this box frame here, I'm going to be using some 1-inch thick polystyrene foam insulation. This comes in 4x8 sheets that you can pick up at just about any home center. You can see here I made a pretty good start on this already back in the back corner where the arroyo is going to be. There's going to be a trestle bridge going over here. And I'm going to use this as a starting point to carry the foam around the other two front sides of the layout. So it'll be landscaped all the way around on 3 sides. The back side is going to have a painted backdrop, I've decided. So not a lot of rock work to do back there. I've got about a 3-inch gap here between the box frame and the deck. So that translates to 3 layers of foam. So I'm going to take some measurements here for the first piece and we'll get started. Looks like about 9 by 3.5. I want to come out about 1 inch beyond the edge of the box frame here. It's kind of a cheat to make the layout a little bigger than it really is, a little bigger than that 2x4 feet, and to have some scenery in the foreground for photographs and viewing of the layout. Just works out nicely. Just happen to have a scrap here that's pretty close to those dimensions already. Just cut the length down a little bit. For cuts like these, I like to use the old score and snap method. Just to take a utility knife, cut down a little over halfway through, and then you can just snap it off like that. Well, now that I've got a good blank, bring it over here, line it up with the existing piece. A little mark here. I'll know where to cut. And I can kind of decide how I want this to look. Just kind of sketching in a organic rocky shape. I don't want to get too close to that edge there. Just using a good old, lead pencil, number 2 pencil for this. Sometimes I use a Sharpie. Truth is, I usually use whatever happens to be handy within arm's reach. All right, now we can cut along this line here, cut that shape out with a hot wire cutter. I often get asked for recommendations on hot wire cutters. I'll probably put a link to this one down in the video description. It served me pretty well. It was cheap. I picked it up on Amazon. It's got several different attachments. Truth is, with the bargain ones like this, I get the bargain ones, I get the cheap ones because I tend to go through them pretty fast. I wear them out. So, there's really not much difference between them. One's as good as another until you get up into the, the high dollar ones. And, maybe I'll invest in one of those one day because I do use this an awful lot. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that's pretty good. Ease this edge back a little bit. On this layout, unlike the Banded Canyon, the rocks are really not the main artistic statement that I'm making. On that one, the rocks were much more prominent and kind of the main visual element of the layout. This one, the rocks are a supporting player to the structures, so I'm not going to get too fancy with the rock carving. San Lorenzo on Verne's old layout, that was a low desert country layout. It wasn't up in the canyon lands like Thunder Mesa or Bandit Canyon is. So a little bit different kind of southwestern rock work is required. But the next step is still to use a wire brush. This is a stainless steel wire brush picked up at my local Ace Hardware store, and to add some grain to that rock and some variation. And you know, I see some people try this technique and they get kind of timid with it. You really want to dig in there and break pieces off. You know, that's what's going to make it look realistic. If you just kind of just lightly go across the surface, it doesn't look nearly as good as if you just go in there and just like really go to town on it. Break it apart, because that's the way rock looks in real life. And dig it out under there like that. Then I use my heat gun. Come back and lock that texture into place. What I'm doing is basically melting it just a little bit, just enough to get rid of the fuzz and to harden the texture. This is going to make it, take paint a lot easier and be much less likely to flake away from wear and tear. So that piece is ready to go on now. And to secure that in place, I'm going to be using my favorite Loctite Power Grab all-purpose adhesive. Now you're going to have little gaps and seams like this all the way around. In a later step, we'll go back and fill those in, or not. Sometimes they look good. They add to the look, but for the most part, we fill those in so it's all uniform. In the last installment, I put this toggle switch in here, which controls the polarity of this frog on the turnout. And I've decided I want to move it a little bit further down here because I'm going to have just one little piece of fascia that comes up from the box frame level up to the layout deck. And that's because there's going to be a road coming right here, a little grade crossing. And this will be, kind of visually bring you into town. And in the modeled world, that's how the people get into town. And so that gives me a place to put the switch and probably the push button, which will activate the sound a bit later on. So along the front here, I only need a piece that's about 1 3/4 of an inch deep. So I've gone ahead and cut out a little template for that piece of fascia that's going to come up here. Over on this corner, cut some pieces to fit around this NCE faceplate. I've decided this is where it's going to be. I'm going to keep it right there. A couple of screws holding it into place. And I'm just going to build the rock work right up around it so it'll look like it's recessed back in there. Now starting in on the second layer, I'm just tracing the outline here onto the next blank. And some of you might be wondering why not just cut, a 3-inch piece, and carve that out. Well, you could do it that way, but in my experience, it's not, you're not gonna have enough depth and variation. It's not gonna be as interesting looking. Now on this piece, I have a bit more of a slope, kind of sloping down from the roadbed layer. I'm just making some marks on here to indicate that. Where I've got 2 layers that meet up like this, I like to come back again with the wire brush. I mean, we're going to fill that in later, but I still want the layers to meet up as closely as I can get them. Hit it again with the heat gun. That's really all there is to this foam rock carving technique. Now I just need to continue going around and adding the layers until I get up to the top. I think this is all coming together pretty well so far. And now I want to start working on this arroyo section over here, so I pulled the whole layout away from the wall a little bit. I think we're going to call this Arroyo del Burro in honor of Burro Canyon, which was something that Verne Niner had always planned for the Estrella Sonora Grande, but he never actually got around to building that part. He wanted to have a nice desert canyon with a big bridge across it. So we're going to make a small part of that dream come true here, I think. Actually, thinking back on my semester of high school Spanish, the name should probably be Arroyo de los Burros, not Arroyo del Burro. Well, I'm sure someone will let me know the correct phrasing and pronunciation in the comments. Sometimes you need to do a little bit of creative engineering where these layers come together and meet up. I had to add a little piece of foam core here, bring this up to the proper level so this would all align. One thing I don't always show in these videos is the amount of waste that this particular scenery technique generates. I do my best to, collect all the larger pieces and reuse them again on projects in the future, but you're going to end up with a lot of foam dust and a lot of little tiny bits and pieces, and if I'm being completely honest, most of that ends up in the trash. I had the chance to go home and cut this piece of fascia out of some 1/8 inch masonite. Now I'm just installing the switches. This one, of course, is for our polarity of the frog at the turnout. But this little temporary on push button switch, that's going to control the sound effects for the mission and the town. I'm not ready to install the sound unit just yet, but I am going to go ahead and pre-wire this switch. That'll make it a lot easier to hook everything up when the time comes. In the opening here, I've added a couple of pieces of 1/4 inch stock at the top and the bottom, and those are going to help me position this piece of fascia and glue it into place. Just going to put a little wood glue top and the bottom. Put all the wires through. That should slide up in there and then come up flush with that. Just like that. All right. Well, now I can use some Sculptamold and some joint compound to blend these foam layers together and then blend everything in with the layout deck. Well, now that we're going to start working with wet materials like joint compound and eventually paint, I'll go ahead and cover all the track with some blue painter's tape, just to keep it as clean as possible as we go forward. I'm going to start by mixing up some Sculptamold. Got about 2 cups here in my tray. I'm just going to keep adding water little by little till I get it to the consistency I want, which is kind of like modeling clay. Kind of a cross between modeling clay and thick oatmeal. I like to mix it thick like this, so it's much easier to work with and really cuts down on the drying time as well. And I think I'm going to start in this corner right here. Just take a little pinch of it. My goal here is to blend the foam in with the cork here on the layout deck, so it's pretty much a seamless transition. Got a couple of tools, a butter knife and my good old Bob Ross palette knife, but usually my favorite tool for this is just my finger. Get a lot more control. It starts to stick to your fingers. You just get a little water on there, smooth it out. I'm going to be using joint compound further down just to fill in these little cracks here. I'm using a Sculptamold up here because it fills gaps much better. And Sculptamold is a plaster-based product. Basically plaster and cellulose. So it's kind of like a cross between plaster and paper mache. But it's much more lightweight than just straight plaster. Right now I'm just getting it where I want it, and I will come back as it starts to set up and get a little bit more texture in there to match the foam rock work. I'm going to keep this nice and smooth on top here because there's going to be a structure here in the future. I'll talk a little bit about my design philosophy here and why I made the different choices that I made when putting the foam in. Notice in some places the foam comes up higher than the layout deck, in some places it's lower. That just gives a much more interesting looking profile to the layout than if it was all even. And since we're modeling the rocky desert Southwest, the Sonoran Desert, we want to have that. Not only that, but I put the little foam pieces here along the edge in some places, and they can act as sort of as bumpers. This is a place where the track comes really close to the edge, so God forbid I have a derailment there. I've got a little something to keep the whole kit and caboodle from going over the side. Just using some Sculptamold here to blend in that little piece of fascia just added. So this is going to be a permanent installation. It's not going to be removable, but I can still access all the components from underneath and from the back. Verne didn't have any tunnels on the old ENSG, so I don't have any here either. There's really not room for them anyway. But it is always interesting when the train can disappear from view for a moment or two. And the mission here provides some of that. But I also wanted to have some little rock formations on this side that come up above track level, sort of a rock cut. Again, just makes things a little bit more dramatic and interesting to look at. This is a good time too to go back and fill in any of the holes I made with screws or pins or toothpicks. Now I've gone through that entire batch, and I'm probably going to need to make another one, finish off the canyon over here. But before I do that, I want to come back and do a little bit more blending and sculpting with a wet knife and my wet finger. As this stuff starts to set up, now it becomes much easier to sculpt it into rocky shapes. I just like to sometimes just take the flat of the knife and just go like that. Makes a nice little rocky outcropping shape. and generally just, blend it in more with the foam rocks. So when it's painted, it'll all look like one piece. All right, just about done with the Arroyo over here, which means I'm just about done with the Sculptamold. And next we can move on to filling in the smaller gaps between the foam with some joint compound. Now, fortunately, I don't need to wait for the Sculptamold to dry before I start applying the joint compound. And I could do this entire thing with Sculptamold. I could do these little gaps also, but my process is always evolving, and I think I probably change it a little bit on every project. Drives some people crazy, I know, but I find it the easiest to kind of put this on with a stiff brush, work it back into the gap there, and that's going to help me blend it in a little bit too, because those brush strokes can go in the same direction as the carved strata that I put into the foam and help blend all of that together. This stuff I don't like to put on too thick because it will shrink, and it'll take a long time to dry. Sometimes if the gap's a little bigger, you can just kind of work it back in there with the end of the brush. And I might come back and go over this again a second time just to make sure I didn't miss any spots. Nice thing is, if you put it on thin, it dries quickly enough that you can do that. And here I really only have 3 layers of foam to do, so it shouldn't take very long at all. All right, really not much else to do now except to leave all this alone and let it dry completely overnight, so then I can come back and put on the first scenic base coat of paint. Speaking of that, now this is a box of Polyblend Sanded Grout, 7-pound box. The color here is sandstone. Now you can pick this stuff up in the tile department of just about any good hardware store, home center, Lowe's, Home Depot, places like that. And this is what Verne used for almost all of the ground cover on the Estrella and Sonora Grande. In fact, he introduced me to the idea of using sanded grout for ground cover, and I've used it on a lot of projects since then. This is the color he used. And so what I would like is to have a scenic base color for the layout that matches this sandstone color sanded grout. Now I could just cut out this color swatch on the sign here and take it down and have it color matched at the paint department at my Ace hardware store. But these are notoriously inaccurate as far as the actual color vagaries in the printing process and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is make a little color swatch that I can take down there and have color matched, and I'll show you how I do that. So I've got a little square, little 2-inch square of illustration board here that I've cut out. Brushing on some white glue. And on top of that, I'm going to sprinkle on the sanded grout. Try not to make too much of a mess while I'm doing it. I'll wet that down. A little wet water. And then I'll dribble some diluted white glue on top of that just for good measure. Okay. All right, and now our little swatch has had a chance to dry completely overnight. So we've got a good color sample to work with here. And you can see it is not the same as the swatch on the side of the box. It's a little bit warmer than that is. So now I'll just take this down to the hardware store and have them mix me up probably just a quart of interior flat in this color. All right, got our paint mixed. Open this up now and see how it looks. There's our sample. That's pretty darn close. Seeing as how it'll dry about a shade darker than that, that's just about perfect. Well, I'll let everything dry overnight. I'm just going to start in up here at the top and work my way around. Really nothing too tricky about this at all. Just trying to get an even base coat of paint on everything, basically everything but the track. In this area, I'm using a big foam brush to get a lot of coverage right off the bat. Foam brushes are good for getting back into the detail too. It's basically a sponge on a stick. And we're going to transform this from a pink cake with white frosting into a much more believable looking desert scene. I'm going to temporarily remove the DCC panel, because I really don't want to get paint on that. I could unplug everything, you know, and stash it all away, but this is just easier. Just tape it up. There's going to be more happening here with this fascia in the future. Right now, I just want to get paint around the edges of it. Once again, this paint is just flat interior latex. Usually get the cheapest brand they have. And then when we do the scenery painting in an upcoming installment, you know, most of that will be done with acrylic paint. Right now, just want to get a nice even coat over everything. Just touching up here and there, spots I missed. There'll probably be more of that. But for now, I should just leave all this alone and let it dry for 2 or 3 hours. Well, we've still got a few wet spots here and there, but I think it's safe to go ahead and take the tape off now. This is dry enough now that I can put the structures back on too. I can still barely see my outlines there underneath the paint. Well, I think we're off to a pretty good start here with the scenery. Now I'll clean the track and see if the train's still running. Well, I am quite pleased on everything I was able to get done this time out. Finished up all of this foam rock work, got a scenic base coat on here. And that means that next time I can come back and finish this scenic paint job on all of this, really bring it to life. We'll add some ground cover and probably paint and ballast the track and, you know, maybe add a few more details if there's time. And that's all I've got for this one. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you're subscribed with notifications turned on so we can see you back here again next time. In the meantime, you can also follow over on Instagram at thunder.mesa and check out the resources available at the Thunder Mesa Studio website. That's thundermesa.studio. And did you know you can now join Patreon for free and get immediate access to the model railroading chat forums on my page? That's patreon.com/thundermesa. And of course, if you'd really like to help support the channel, you can do what these fine folks did and become a paid member and get access to kits and parts from my build, exclusive content, laser cutting files, and more. That's patreon.com/thundermesa. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Adios for now.